I was horrifically indulged by the editor. I got away with so much in those BBC books. You know, people wouldn't be seen on the tube with it because they thought that people would think they were gay because they were reading a book with a poodle on the front. And then when the show came back, it was like, oh, well, it has to be serious now because there are so many people with their eyes on this. This bit, Paul, where Mike has wrapped the meteorite in his jacket, would it be better if he says, Doctor, I've wrapped it in my trousers? No, Tom. I'd be sitting having coffee with Tom at 8 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was, in Soho, like above the streets. And we'd be discussing like where you would take your TARDIS.
Hello and welcome to The Edge of Discussion. And today I'm in the recently opened Panda's Books and Records, and I'm sat here with its owner and a writer of many audio dramas, short stories, novels, and all kinds of wonderful things. It's the one and only Paul Magrs. Very nice to be sat here with you today in your shop.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you for welcoming us in to your shop, and thank you for welcoming us into your world, as it were. You've been writing professionally for over 30 years.
Yeah.
But at what point in your life did you go, I want to write?
It was never really a moment like that. I think as soon as I was aware that people did this, I mean, I was bought books very early on by my mum, who couldn't really afford it, to buy me Ladybird books every time we went to the shops, the little shop in the town where we lived, Peterlee in the northeast. And it was every single time. And I knew these books off by heart. They were the well-loved classics, I think they were called, or the well-loved tales. And I knew all those fairy tales off by heart. And pretty soon I realised that somebody drew and wrote these things. I grew up in the northeast on a council estate in a new town and went to a comp, and very few of us went away to university, and most people, if not all, went back to where they'd come from. They went back to the northeast, and people wanted to do things in the arts. We were a few years too young to have been punks, but that ethos was very much there, that you made things happen and you attached yourself to bands, or you created bands, or you made fanzines, or you joined drama clubs. And then it's a hard realization when you go away to college or anywhere and realize that the people who get on in those worlds are the ones who can be supported by their rich parents, or they can go off and, I remember there being plays and shows that people would take to Edinburgh, but not everyone could afford to go and support themselves in the summer by doing things like this, and I certainly couldn't. And you become aware that there are disparities between people, and sometimes the expectations are kind of lowered accordingly. And it's something that's made me furious, I guess, all my life. And so I've done everything I can to kind of kick against the kind of limitations set upon people and upon me.
From that sense of challenger, going against those limitations, do you think that influenced or put some sort of idea in your head of sort of what sort of writer you'd want to be?
The writers I loved were often people who talked about class, or talked about people that felt like people I knew. So on TV, I loved Alan Bennett, I loved Victoria Wood, and the kind of things that I would record on cassette and play through headphones to kind of learn the rhythms of their dialogue. I loved staying up to watch old movies. I loved Coronation Street, and heard all the stories from the family about when Coronation Street first came on. It was like the first time there were voices like that, telling those stories or talking like that. That, I guess, is the heritage that I'm kind of growing out of. And I realised that when I come to kind of make my own stuff up, or interpose myself in other people's stories. It's often creating a kind of, usually a female working class voice in the middle of it. So when I do Gothic mystery novels about the Bride of Frankenstein, Brenda, and I did 8 of those books, she's got a very kind of working class northern voice in the middle of that. Or when I do Doctor Who, I do it through the eyes of Iris Wildthyme, who's from the wrong side of the tracks as far as the Time Lords are concerned. And I realise this is a running theme through things I've done.
Of course we will be coming on to Doctor Who, but before we sort of delve into more of those sort of questions, I'm going to ask a question that I don't think most writers would like to be asked, so you'll have to forgive me for asking you. But if you were to sort of put a couple of words on it, how would you, Paul Magrs, describe your writing style?
My style. I would like it to be warm and approachable.
Yeah.
I think warm is good. I think it has to be inviting, and that's what I tried to make it. I like the idea of it being something you could hear, which is why I like doing audio as well. My ideal is that experience you have when you're reading something and the book melts away and the words on the page melt away, and they don't draw attention to themselves, and you forget you're reading a book. So I'd like it to be kind of transparent in some way as well, that it just invites you in and you're hearing it, and all you're left with is the pure experience of story. So yeah, something warm and something that's immediate, I think. Yeah. That would be my ideal. I'm not saying I always get that, but that's what I'm after.
I think warm is I would feel, me personally, when I open a book, I want to feel warm.
Yeah.
I want to feel comfort. I want to feel let in. I think that is everything that you could sort of.
I think
want
comforting,
from something like that.
Yeah, comforting would be a nice thing to.
A nice cup of tea.
Yeah. And then you can shock them in the middle of it by,
you don't put enough sugar in or something.
Put some arsenic.
Or arsenic.
Or an eyeball.
Yeah. Now, if we're going back all those 30 years, now your first book was published in 1995.
Yeah.
Marked for Life. Now, it features a certain character in it that you have mentioned, a certain Iris Wildthyme. For those who don't know, could you explain the character, who that is, where they came from, and sort of how that voice that you were talking about then, listening to the important women in your life, made that way into that first book?
Yeah, I mean, she's nothing like she turns out in the end to be. She's in back in those early kind of literary novels that I did, which are set on a council estate in the north, and they're magical realist novels.
Couldn't be more different.
And so they and she's kind of quite posh. She's quite grand. She's the outsider coming into a family as somebody's nana's lesbian lover. But the name and the kind of character, the position she is in the story is always this kind of slightly magical being who is iridescent somehow, who stands out as glittering and colourful. And somehow half in this fiction and half in some other world. And in Marked for Life she talks about things like Virginia Woolf's Orlando and characters like that, who are ageless and genderless and the rest of it. But the name and the kind of possibilities of the character have stayed with me forever. And then eventually when I started doing Doctor Who stuff, she solidified again as this, or incarnated herself as this time lady, as this opposite number to the Doctor, in some ways. The essence of everything he could never do. So she smokes and drinks and swears, changes things to how she wants. She rackets about and leaves messages for him in time and space and consults her diary because she's better at keeping a record of where she's been than he ever was. That textual evidence is the main thing. He's kind of a bit chaotic in her eyes, and of course she's massively chaotic in his eyes. So energy developed through various of the BBC books that I was doing in the late 90s, and then in the early 2000s, Big Finish take her up, and Gary Russell casts Katie Manning, and all of that seems inevitable now, and Katie is forever Iris.
Yeah. Did it feel like a sort of natural fit that this character that you created sort of separate to the Whoniverse?
Very much so, yeah.
That this would just sort of slip in. How was that process?
It's a weird thing. It was the 90s.
Yeah.
You know, so it's hard to recall in some ways, and other ways it's extremely vivid. But I began the 90s by finishing my first degree and doing an MA in creative writing at Lancaster. And it was me, you know, I'm going to be a literary novelist. I'm going to write queer magical realism set in the North, which I did, and I began those Phoenix Court novels, as I called them, the trilogy set on the estate. But I was putting behind me any idea of doing science fiction or doing Doctor Who, because I'd written masses of my own Doctor Who fan fiction before that, never really publishing it, and I wasn't part of fandom at all. But that was the point at which the new adventures were starting, and so there were these original novels, and I thought, nope, keep away from it. But the day that I arrived back on campus to begin my MA and be a literary novelist, Paul Cornell was on the course, and he was just about to publish his first new adventure novel. So that made me all enthusiastic about them all over again. And Mark Gatiss was publishing his, and I'd been at school with him, so I felt like everybody around me was suddenly doing Doctor Who books.
Do you feel like the odd one out at that
I
stage?
really
Like,
did,
where's
yeah.
my part? Where's my piece of the pie?
And I wasn't part of that gang at all. So I thought, no, you know, it's not for me. And actually, it was a good thing to go and do literary novels first and establish myself as, you know, as somebody who was publishing off my own bat in my own world first. I think that was the right way to do it for me. And then, so when by the time I'd sold a couple of books and I'd finished my PhD and on magical realism and moved to Edinburgh, and the BBC had firstly made the McGann movie, and then the BBC books were taking back the license, that's when I thought, no, I can do it now. And I'm ready to, in my advanced age of whatever it was, 27. I felt ready to write some Doctor Who, kind of publicly. Yeah, so that's whenever that was, a long time ago.
When this happened, and sort of the BBC takeover happened of the Doctor Who books, your first published piece of work was for a short trip story.
Yeah.
Called Old Flames, which from the very off, you're there going, right, I'm going to bring a bit of me into Doctor Who. How was that whole process for you? Well,
it was a nice one. I mean, Steve Cole is still one of my best friends. He's coming to stay next week. He was the editor. He'd just taken over, and I'd written in, and he kind of picked up the letters. And I think I'd written a kind of loose outline, intending it to be a novel. But then he was looking to fill up this collection of stories and try people out. So this whole story just became a short story. And the perfect vehicle for bringing in Iris. And then they did the audio, and of course Nicholas Courtney got to do Iris. He's the first person to play her, which Katie Manning didn't know until recent years, so I could tell her, you're not the first. It was Nick Courtney. So all of that was delightful. A lot of the history of this is about friendships.
Yes.
And that's something I'm very proud of, that Steve is still there, and Katie's there, and Jack Rayner was there, and somebody who was working with Steve at the time got in touch recently because I had a radio play on, and she said, do you remember the days when we used to, it was this kind of crazy, when Steve was the only person in charge of Doctor Who at White City, and it's just nice, these kind of long friendships with people. when that come out of these chances we had to make stuff that wouldn't exist without the enthusiasm of daft people like us.
Going from a short story, you then went to write your first full novel for Doctor Who.
quickly.
Quite quickly, The Scarlet Empress.
I think it was like the same few months.
It was very close.
Yeah.
How is the process, sort of mentally, to go from doing something short form to then going, now I've got to do so much more, or is it worse doing it the other way around?
No, it's just a laugh, really. It's none of it's very difficult. I mean, it was a time when I was more concerned with the fact that I'd gone for this job at the University of East Anglia, which was the only job I would have gone for at the time. I'd taken off 2 years after my PhD to live in a very kind of bohemian way in Edinburgh, just writing in bars and cafes all the time, and writing, I think, what was going to be my third literary novel. But then this job lecturing in creative writing at UEA came up, and I just went for it and got it, surprised myself by getting it. So everything was changing that year, and I'd met Jeremy, my partner, at that point in the summer of '96, and then was immediately moving down south to Norwich, and then got the commission for the Doctor Who book. And it was quite nice because it tided me over through these life changes that I had. Doctor Who, this massive novel, which was longer than it should have been anyway, to tide me over through all these immense changes and going into this very kind of respectable job in academia, and a place that was full of kind of all sorts of interesting people, some nice, some not so nice, some famous, some who thought they were, and just quite a lot of challenges in loads of ways. And actually having something that you were completely in control of, because until you hand it over to the editor, no one's going to mess with that book. Yeah. And even then, I was horrifically indulged by the editor. I got away with so much in those BBC books, because Steve loved what I did and was so nice to me, and Jack did. And I think they were just pleased somebody was taking chances and doing outrageous things, which they kind of were looking back. It was... there were books that brought in magical realism, fantasy, tropes from all kinds of different genres, that brought in kind of great swathes of camp and comedy and just colourfulness. And that hadn't always been... Well, it hadn't been around at all. Let's face it. I mean, the show had been camp on TV sometimes despite itself. But the idea of a kind of... the anarchic spirit of what I was doing, I guess, was, in terms of mucking about with science fiction, hadn't always been there. And of course, a novel is the place you can really let rip and do it.
Yeah.
So I felt very lucky with that, and it did feel like a bit of a lifesaver as well in the midst of all the changes.
When you mentioned there the editing process, how is that sort of? How did that come about? How was that process? How did it form? What role did you play in that? Did you just sit back and go, okay, I've done my bit now?
Oh God, no. No, it's very collaborative and very intensive. And it was the beginnings of email. I'd never had an email account. I'd never used the internet. I'd never had an office with a computer.
Was this your introduction to the internet?
So when I started at UEA, I had an office and this terrible cronky old computer that used to have to hit. And it was yellow with nicotine from the previous user, and it used to flinch. But it was the internet.
Yeah.
And I got email with my edit notes on. I think up until that point, up until the notes came in, it was all by letter. So the stuff that Steve sent me to start with was by letter, but suddenly it was all by email. And of course, you get these swathes of notes, very chatty notes, very productive notes, but there was a lot of queries and a lot of things to do to it, and lots of rewriting. And for me, rewriting or edits are a chance to kind of get back inside the text and invent more stuff, open up more spaces and add explanations, add emotion, add all the things that I've maybe missed out the first time around. And of course, it's a book about stories within stories, so there were chances to interpose more stuff. Which again I was encouraged to do. And it is extremely collaborative, and that's where the friendship between us began, and it continued until until now. But we wrote a book together that came out last year, which again is about storytelling and stories within stories. So this stuff has always stayed with us. I mean, it's not always like that. I've worked with editors of all kinds.
I was going to say, to have an editor say, add more, is...
I mean, he also said, take that out and stop doing that, and don't, curtailing things as you'd expect, and trying to curb some of my excesses and indulgences, but I'd expect that. But I was very lucky, and I'd worked with, editors in different genres anyway by then, so I was quite experienced at that stage, which again is a good thing because I'd had all that experience before. I didn't fight it. It's collaborative. Everybody involved wants the book to be as good as it can be, and that's what you have to realise. I think if you're hiring writers, you want to help them to sound as much like themselves as they can. Gary Russell doing Big Finish, those first couple of years was brilliant at that. Everything he did was about encouraging people to sound more like themselves, which meant that all those stories stand out as very writer-led. And that's why people look back at those early years of Big Finish as a kind of a golden time for those kinds of stories. You look at those seasons of McGann or whatever, and you can tell who's written each one, and that's important, I think. It's voice.
Now, we're going to go back a bit to those sort of that 90s period, the BBC Books period. I'm a particular fan of the covers of that era.
Wow.
And I know that's exactly...
That's quite unusual.
And I know that's not a popular opinion. And we were talking about the birth of the internet, sort of the birth of early Photoshop and that sort of things. As a writer, we talk about that colour, that sense of image. How was that for you, seeing this, there's something you've loved your life, Doctor Who, and this is how it's going out to the world with this is how they look on a shelf, as if they were here. How was that for you? What did you think of those visual representations of what was in your head?
I never really liked the Virgin ones, to be honest. I thought they felt like graphic novel things because they were kind of acrylic paintings, weren't they? And so they weren't my favourite. I liked some of them, but I loved the fact that they were the BBC ones were different. I don't have the trouble with them that some people do. I know people are kind of...
That's why I had to say up front that I'm quite a big fan, because I know that is not the...
People have strong opinions about everything, don't they? And those in particular. I was very lucky with the ones they gave me.
Some good ones.
and especially Mad Dogs and Englishmen, which still makes grown-up, quite repressed straight men cry. And that makes me howl with laughter. People wouldn't be seen on the tube with it because they thought that people would think they were gay because they were reading a book with a poodle on the front.
With a bright gold Doctor Who logo, I must add.
And a gold gun and a ciggy and a leopard skin throw. But I love the response to that. And Black Sheep, who were the company that did those covers, and yes, of course, sometimes they did do Photoshop things where it was McGann and a planet, and there were some that were kind of knocked together. But they always asked me, "What do you want?" And I wrote, "I want a pink poodle with a smoking gun and a cigarette in a thing and a leopard skin throw."
Exactly as you described. That's what came out.
And I picked up my post here in Manchester. Jeremy had moved to Manchester, and I came here for the weekend, and I picked up post, and I was opening it in a bar on Canal Street, going through all my posts, and then opened this cover proof, and it was like they've done exactly what I asked. I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a joke, like they'd done this as a joke, and here's the real one, with a planet and McGann's face. But no, they'd gone for it and done exactly. And it was like people entering into the spirit of what I was doing and enjoying it and thinking, and I've been lucky in that in various projects over the years I've had that kind of sense of people joining in, that this is fun and anarchic and something we can all be doing together. And that really felt like it then.
That must be so liberating as well, to know everyone here they get it.
Yeah.
They're on my side, which is a wonderful thing for any creative.
I mean, it was lucky. It was only 2 or 3 people, because it was the people at Black Sheep and it was the BBC, and it was a very contained thing. And then the book's out, and they can't stop it now. It's in the world with a golden logo and all the rest of it. And then when the show came back, it was like, oh, well, it has to be serious now because there are so many people with their eyes on this and you have to be... And, you were told quite categorically, Doctor Who isn't camp and silly. So
how did you take that? How did you react to that after something as wonderfully out there as that as Mad Dogs in every single way? That story.
Yeah, I mean within 4 years it was no, you must behave. Absolutely no Iris Wildthyme, no campness, no silly, because that's not Doctor Who. You've got to make the straight boys get into it, and I was whatever. So it always annoyed me that I thought it was a bit kind of straight acting, to be honest.
It's Doctor Who.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, it takes 20 years, and it's gay as hell, and camp as anything, and full of fantasy and magic. So I just think, I won that one in the end. It all came round, if not quite in exactly the same way, but it's not a million miles from a pink poodle with a smoking gun.
No, it's
not. Put it that way.
Around that same time, we've touched on briefly about Gary Russell and Big Finish, and sort of the birth of that whole of an enterprise of Doctor Who, and you were there pretty early on.
Quite early on, yeah. I mean, because I didn't live in London. I wasn't around. Again, not around. So I wasn't involved in all of that, but I did get asked to go to their party, their kind of launch party, in 1999 when they'd released a couple. Jeremy came as well, and it was somewhere in a basement bar off Oxford Street on a Sunday afternoon, and it was full of all these kind of crazy people, and Jeremy sat the whole time talking to Servalan, smoking and having nibbles with Servalan, who was there in costume.
Oh, wow.
I think she just dressed like that all
what
the
a
time.
sight.
It was surreal, because I was getting, nibbles at the bar, and he said, I'm just getting them for Servalan. Anyway, there was lots of people there, and people that I hadn't seen since school, like Mark Gatiss or college, for seeing Cornell again. And Gary Russell took me aside, and we'd emailed back and forth, because I said I'd love to write for Big Finish, and he was very enthusiastic because he knew my books, and I didn't know him, but I had subscribed to the audiovisual cassettes. So I'd had posts from Gary for years, getting those sent to me. And so he took me aside, and at that point he said, we've got Tom. It was going to be Tom. That was the, come up with an outline by Monday, and this was Sunday, I think.
Wow.
I had very, very kind of short amount of time to write a whole outline, and so I did. I threw together all the ideas I had for what would make, for me, a kind of a brilliant Hinchcliffe Gothic story. So a great setting and possession and artifacts, and taking an old Gothic story. It was Dracula, actually. That was the beginning of Stones of Venice. And then it changed. Tom wasn't going to do it. He'd looked at outlines and decided that it's a daft thing to send anybody, I think, outlines. You should send them dialogue, send them pages of dialogue, and he would have loved that. That's what we did much later with Nest Cottage, of course. Yeah. We sent him a script so he could fall in love with it. And then Peter Davison was going to do it, but suddenly we had McGann, and that was a big deal, and it had to be written again very quickly. And I was lecturing full time, so it was a few all-nighters doing Stones of Venice. Oh, wow. But it was my first audio script. And so I learnt a lot. I learnt an awful lot. And again, Gary was there to a very light edit, really, looking back. But again, helping you to sound as much like you as you can.
Did it help with it? You say originally being Tom, but then the change to Paul. Did that almost make things slightly, I don't want to say less pressured, but of course you'd been sort of inhabiting his doctor,
yes,
on a couple of occasions before that. Did that help, or was that a bit of a challenge? Because of course now you're into the audio realm rather than novel form.
No, I could hear his voice very clearly, because we had that gang of writers doing the BBC books. We'd all been in touch with each other around the world. Kate and John and Lance Parkin and me and Lawrence Miles. We emailed and we phoned, and we were going to collaborate on all sorts of things. We were going to write books together, and it was like creating the Eighth Doctor out of nothing out of a kind of alchemy. So we felt we kind of not owned him, but we had part ownership on this kind of particular kind of voice, and I brought that to bear on writing The Stones of Venice, I think. So I don't know if it's less or more daunting. It was daunting anyway, but just bliss. And you forget how much how ballsy you are at 28, 29. It's like, no, I'm doing this. Of course I'm doing this. I might pause for thought now, although I don't know. No, it was just heaven. It was heaven, and a brilliant challenge.
Of course, the sort of one of the big key players in the Doctor Who world that we mentioned is Iris. Katie Manning playing that part. How did that come about, and how were you sort of involved in that? In that process? Not
at all. We talked about using her as a character, and there was even talk of having her in the first one I did. But then it was like, one thing at a time. And so my second script, and at this point it was going to be that people got to write 2 scripts and then they're looking for new writers. That was Gary's thing, which is amazing looking back now, the idea that you get 2 goes and it's probably right. And then, so it was my second one. I thought, well, I really want to have Iris in, and I was made part of this Excelis thing, which was going to be a whole other story arc. And I was lucky in that I was doing the first one, so I didn't have to kind of build on anybody else's stuff. I could set things up. So I just wrote it and heard her as she was in my head. And then Gary had the job of finding someone, and various people were mentioned, but not too far into it, he phoned me and said, Iris is completely mad, isn't she? What about Katie? And they came out of nowhere for me.
That was a shock then, that you hadn't thought of that idea at all.
Never. It was complete kind of casting brilliance, one of those things. But as soon as he said it, it's like, yes, of course. Yeah. But because she was in Australia as well, that I never thought it was even a possibility. And I wasn't there for it, so I didn't hear any of it until the CDs arrived. However long later that was, ages afterwards. And of course it was just magic. It was the same as David Benson doing Panda. It's a perfect... it's just serendipity, just perfection. And, I didn't meet her till a couple of years after that, and we were instant friends, and we've, again, one of those friendships that just takes over your life and is with you for years and years. And I'm very proud of that.
One of the great joys of that and of doing Big Finish is getting to get these incredible actors who have occupied a place in there and getting to sort of hear them say your words. Did you ever get the chance to go and visit any recordings? Was that something that you ever wanted to do, or was it like, I would definitely want to be there? How did that go about?
I enjoy it. They rarely ask you.
Interesting.
I was there for some of Katie's because she was keen that I'd be there. And when she did Find and Replace, and that's a very particular one. It's a very kind of emotional one. And the fact she was doing both roles, she was doing Jo and Iris at the same time. And that was a particular kind of story. And I was there for that, and that was brilliant. I can't think of any other Big Finishes I've been at. I was there for as many of the BBC ones as I could be at, and that was a different thing. That was full of colleagues working together. Yes. It was much fuller of people, and it was a collaborative process. The Nest Cottage stories, in some ways, a more old-fashioned process, like everybody clustered around the microphone in a studio with, where everyone's together.
And we briefly touched on Tom Baker before, and that sort of being a part of early Big Finish potentially, and that didn't come to pass. Of course, years later, his return to Doctor Who via your Nest Cottage stories. How did that come about? And with Mike Yates, of all people, as well.
I willed the whole thing into existence by being furious from the age of 13 when he didn't come back for the 5 Doctors. He was my Doctor, and I was livid that he didn't come back. I felt very abandoned. His leaving Doctor Who was such a part of my turning 11, and everything getting worse, starting at Woodham Comp. And everything
tied into Tom Baker leaving.
Yeah, and the 70s finish, and the world it felt very different. And so in my mind, it was a big, it's an emotive thing. And we, there'd been various attempts. There'd been Big Finish. BBC Books tried to get him back to do a audio book of stories at one point, but he wasn't going to do that. He I think pulled out at the last minute. There was stuff in the 90s when he was going to do stuff on TV again.
Yes.
That didn't happen. But then it wasn't till 2008, and he was doing the Target readings, and I had an inkling that he wanted to do more just from listening to them. I just thought, this is somebody who's found that voice again. And then, of course, Michael Stevens, the brilliant Michael Stevens at BBC Audio, got in touch saying, do you want to pitch for one of these stories? And I was like, I want to pitch for all of these stories. So I kept on pitching, and then eventually got the whole thing to do myself, using these elements that Michael and Kate Thomas, the director, and Tom had kind of brewed up over lunch or whatever, where, the idea that he was somehow retired and living in Sussex and had a housekeeper and was hiding from some kind of creatures. And that, it just became its own thing. And what I'm proudest of, in some ways, is the fact that it's like nothing else in Doctor Who, and it's its own thing. Ongoing, I'm still writing stories in that world. That it's, Tom was different every season he came back as Doctor Who. And of course, in 2009, recording these, he wanted to do it his way then. Yes. And in my mind, I know it's not the canonized version, where it's meant to be set pre-Keter time. In my mind, he's older, doing Nest Cottage. Somehow he survived. Canonically, now we know he could have. There's this bifurcation, bi-regeneration. Bifurcation is a better word for it. He is there doing his thing in this strange and macabre and funny world of the Nest Cottage stories. And of course, when you do look back at mid to late 70s Tom, there are those same kinds of characters as I've got in Nest Cottage. I've just amplified the grotesquerie, and that's what Tom loved, I think. And having written the first script and got it sent to him early in 2009, I do remember getting either a postcard or an email saying Tom loves it, and he was going to do it. And it was always chancy, could we pull this off? And then, of course, we had the business of it was written for Nicholas Courtney and the Brigadier to start with. And we thought he was going to be okay, and we got assurances he'd be fine, and of course he wasn't fine. And so at the very last minute, it had to be rewritten for another character, and we went through all possibilities, who that could be.
What sort of possibilities were going through your mind at that point, other than panic?
Well, they were discussed properly. It was me and Michael's, like, what Michael Stevens, what can we, and going back to Tom, like, who could it be? Could it be K9 turning up at his door? Could it be Ian Chesterton? But Tom didn't know the character, so he wasn't keen on having somebody he didn't know. Yes. Could it be Katie as Iris? That would have complicated things too much. Could it be Leela? But in the timeline, she'd kind of just left, so that was no good. And when Mike Yates popped up, it was like, that's perfect, because it fits the same kind of unit business as the Brigadier, but he'd be more kind of working on his own bat, off his own bat. And there's bits in episode 5 that fit Mike Yates much better when he eventually turns a gun on the Doctor, I think, or it looks as if he's going to betray him. That's very much in the kind of the world of Mike Yates that we know. Is he still potentially the traitor that he was back in the early 70s? So it was perfect, and he was delightful.
It all fit together.
Yeah, he was really pleased. And then cementing the whole thing, of course, is Susan Jameson, who again I became firm friends with on the first day of recording in Hampstead, where we did the first lot. Sitting outside in the garden of this place and talking about pets and cats and things. And it was a really lovely team. And then, every episode we added extra characters or guest stars. And one of the big things about the fans saying that if there was a talk of it just being, it wasn't multi-voiced like Big Finish, and we had we had a cast of 12 at one point. It's like, if that's not multi-voiced,
massive. That is massive for something like
that. I know,
that.
it was ridiculous. Yeah. And here comes Nerys Hughes, and there was just all these people, lots of voices that were kind of familiar from other things, and everybody got on very well, and it was convivial, and it was funny, and it was slightly anarchic, with of course Tom presiding over this, at times being just,
I'm sure, absurd.
Absurd, yeah, and it was, because it was the window and everybody back beyond their recording, and I'd be in the. This is when we recorded in Soho at the top of this building. But suddenly he'd appear beside me. I wouldn't have, and he'd say, "This bit, Paul, where Mike has wrapped the meteorite in his jacket." It's in the middle of Central Park, and it's burning hot, so he's wrapped his jacket. Would it be better if he says, "Doctor, I've wrapped it in my trousers"? No, Tom. So I've whipped my trousers in. But no, why would he do that? And he would just do it to be naughty, to make me laugh, and to make Michael laugh, and to show off.
Yeah.
And you'd see this face turn through the window and look at you when some whopping double entendre had come out, or he'd caused chaos in the room. There was lots of fun and lots of messing around. And then out of that comes this kind of very intense and wonderful work. I think that there's for me, there's a kind of a charm over all of those particular episodes.
There's something that we've spoken about briefly, which is that sense of friendship. That sense of that is when a creative environment, I think, it seems is at its absolute best, when it is a bunch of friends being able to be silly, being able to be fun. I take it that's something that you want to sort of that you grab and grab hold of wherever that is available.
And I have been at things where it's not there.
That sounds awful. Terrifying.
Not my things, but I've kind of been at things and you're like, oh, this is a bit chilly and it's a bit
cold.
Yeah, a bit people just coming in and doing their bits, and not Doctor Who things necessarily, but other stuff where you're like, whoa, it's missing something, a heart to it. And I remember sitting, because we'd get there early, and I'd be sitting having coffee with Tom at 8 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was, in Soho, like above the streets, and we'd be discussing like where you would take your TARDIS, if you had one. And because I was saying that I think it's time travel could never work for various reasons, and he's just looking at me like, what? I said, well, you'd go back to the crucifixion or the birth of Christ and just have a look. And he says, oh no, you could do that with your TARDIS. I'd go to the jungle and look at parrots and look at all the animals. But then he's saying to you, really, I would take my TARDIS here, and never for a second do you doubt that he has one. And I remember it was like him coming down the street and so swinging a bag full of cakes. I was sat outside a cafe, nervous about the first day of recording, and then just watching him come around the corner first thing in the morning, and he bought cakes for everybody, just looking happy, and then going into the studio. And those things are really important, I think, that they matter.
So I wanted to mention about some of your more recent work. Of course, the stories that you've written in the is there an actual term for them? I must say.
No, because it was never a series.
Classic crossover.
Yeah, that
I don't
sound
think
good.
That's not the term, is it?
No.
But of course, Return of Robin Hood, Doctor Who in Wonderland, Dracula. How did that sort of come about, and to be able to play in an even bigger toy box?
Yeah, I call them the Puffin Classics.
Yes,
and they've made them look very much like the Puffin Classics. So that's
official. That's the term.
That's what I'm calling them. And it was never really a series. Jack Rayner did those two. She did Camelot and Oz, and then I didn't know about them until they were out. And after that, I campaigned massively. You have to let me do this, because as a kid, I was obsessed with not just Doctor Who books, but with Puffin books, and the idea of them being combined was magical. It kind of amuses me that people think they're for kids, because Doctor Who books
do they?
and Yeah, you get that.
Really?
I actually see people saying, "Oh, they're for kids." I read the Target books because they're not for kids. But you profoundly misunderstand all of this. Doctor Who books and Doctor Who itself. The whole idea of it being from people from 8 to 80 was always really important.
Yes.
And so they're kind of literary adventures.
Yeah.
And each time there's a different reason for these books coming true. And I hadn't done Doctor Who novels for a while. I'd done stories, various collections and things, but I hadn't done a whole novel for a while. And I just knew this was my thing more than anybody. And sometimes you've just got to shove yourself forward. And I'm not the best at that. I'm not hard-nosed and I'm not pushy and professional. And I know people who really are. But some things I know, this is what I'm meant to do. And Nest Cottage was one of them. And these were too. And so it's a lovely team at Puffin, and they indulged me something chronic. So I did the first one. And it was never a series. I did the first one, and then when we finished it, I was like, wouldn't it be good if we did one about Greek myths, and it's Joe Grant at the heart of it, or the next year was let's do Wonderland. And then they really were thinking, we've got to wind these up. But let's do the first Doctor and Dracula. So we did. And of course I had ideas running on to others, but I don't know what they're up to really. They came to a figure of 8 because other people had done some as well.
Yeah.
I've written half of the whole series. I think they came to 8 and thought that's 2 bundles of audios.
Yeah.
I think generally that people are publishing less Doctor Who fiction at the moment because the series is in... we don't know what's happening. I think that's an excuse to publish more Doctor Who fiction because our experience as fans is that you want to read the books even more when it's not on the TV. Yeah. But maybe people will catch up and read the things they haven't read yet. And maybe we'll be able to do more in the future. I don't know. It would be good to.
I mean, your last sort of piece of it was 1001 Nights in Time and Space.
Yeah.
How did that all come about?
That's a magical one. That's Steve Cole being a kind of editor at Penguin Books, and them doing these gifty kind of books that are sometimes in-universe non-fiction.
Yes.
And the idea came from the kind of the main editor, Albert, who said something fairy tale-ish. And Steve came to me like, do you want to do this together? Because he knows my interest in storytelling and fairy tales, and it was all in The Scarlet Empress. So I proposed this outline that was kind of Arabian Nights-ish, that has a strange old character who sits down with Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor in the gap between the final 2 episodes of Ncuti's first season, when the universe has been destroyed by Sutekh, and the idea of telling lots of favourite stories to bring the universe back to life, and the stars come back and the characters join them around the campfire, and we retell between us a number of Doctor Who stories from peculiar viewpoints that people aren't expecting. And for me it's an important one about humanising creatures and characters that weren't peripheral characters, but also non-human characters, and telling their tales. And I think that's a vital part of Doctor Who storytelling. And also it's something important these days, that you see things from a point of view that isn't the conventional, that isn't just your kind of people. You're seeing the world from somebody else, from the other's point of view, and that's what stories do, I think. And so it was a real labour of love, the whole thing, working together after all those years of never writing a book together. We'd written an audio together, but we hadn't made a book together. And because it was a kind of treasury of folk tales, it was going to be illustrated. And again, I just had to say, well, I want to do it. And so I did. I did the pictures.
Now, we are sat in a shop which is stock full of pandas.
Yeah. I forget.
Pandas. Explain the importance of pandas, because they are marvellous and they are wonderful, and we've mentioned the good Mr. Benson and bringing that character to life. Where does Panda come from?
Well, he's a running motif in mine and Jeremy's life, and he'd always had a panda growing up, and a voice emerged at some point in our kind of everyday life, And the idea of Panda as a character who's a kind of stern art critic who will say stuff and interpose himself, and be at things when we're there with people. And he found his way into the stories, and he found his way into Iris Wildthyme, and he's a perfect foil for Iris, and then especially when David Benson came along and that pairing happened. And it's taken on all kinds of life since. I did a book of cartoons a few years ago during lockdown where Panda became quite foul-mouthed. And then opening the bookshop, it seemed inevitable that it would have to be Panda's books and records. And in some ways he's the epitome of the kind of pompous arse that you get in the arts, who knows everything and all about everything and blathers his way through. So he's a great person to use to satirise certain attitudes.
Take the piss out of.
Yeah, basically. Yes. But he's still a wonderful character in himself. I've not used him so much. I was proud of getting him into the Doctor Who universe, thinking about it.
Yes.
I did the Muse of Fire for Sylvester and Sophie, and with Iris, and bringing Panda into that was hilarious.
Yeah.
That was a nice thing to do.
What I'd like to end on then, with that sense of fun, is of course I'm sat in this wonderful bookshop.
Yes, you must all come and buy books.
What?
Come and visit the bookshop.
What brought you to this wonderful little shop?
Well, it's like having my own TARDIS. This is me and Jeremy, and we've been together 30 years, and we always knew there'd be some kind of bookshop in the end, book and record shop. And what we do when we have any time is go and look at shops like this. So I always have. I've always bought stacks of books, too many. We filled our house with books and stuff. Physical media, which is so important because streaming is rubbish really, because billionaires control everything and they can pull
whenever
things.
they like.
Yeah. And sort of have your own collection. That was always important. And one of the reasons that Target books were brilliant was that you could hold a whole Doctor Who story in your hands.
Hold a whole season.
Yeah. But the telly is kind of ineffable. It's here and gone, and even on video, the tape would break. There was always a sense that it was imperiled. Paper is really important. Anyway, so we always thought we'd have a bookshop, and I did 15 years as an academic and a teacher. I've done 35. Some of these are overlapping. I'm not that old. 35 as a full-time writer. And I got to 56. I turned 56, and the next day I began a new career as a bookshop owner with Jeremy. And it all came up suddenly because this was a bookshop that existed, and the people had to close it and just they had two bookshops, so they're concentrating on one elsewhere, and this was going to go. And it's Levenshulme, it's our only bookshop. People love it, it's a community place. And we had half a morning really to discuss it. Are we going to buy all the stock and take on the lease? And we were like, yes. And so the day after my 56th birthday, it's like, here we go, we're doing something different. So I'm sat in the middle of our community, surrounded by stuff, by books that mean something, and to me and to Jeremy, and changing the emphasis of the bookshop slightly as we go into things we believe in. So suddenly there's an awful lot of nostalgia and a large children's book section and a Doctor Who section and pulp fiction is important alongside all the kind of art and history and literary fiction and all those things. So it's like living in the middle of a TARDIS.
Yeah. We mentioned that about community and that sense of community. How does it feel for you to have essentially taken up this big part of this community?
Well, Levenshulme, it's a very particular place. It's a very interesting place because it's always been a place with lots of immigration from everywhere, all sorts of places. And our MP for a long time was Gerald Kaufman, who always said, and he was our MP for 40 years, it's a special place, and it's not like anywhere else in Manchester. And I think that's true. It's full of stories. To me, it's the kind of Middlemarch, the kind of microcosm of the whole world, and everything happens here first. And it's full of all kinds of tensions and difficulties and poverty and fly tipping, and it's neglected by the council because it's poor and they don't care, and they make everywhere else fancier. But there's all sorts of interesting people here. All sorts of interesting stuff goes on here. Jeremy organises Levenshulme Pride every year, and that brings, 500 people marching down the middle of the road here in 3 days of events, and that's where I first saw what community is like here. And it's kind of queer in every sense. There's all sorts been here. Arthur Lowe grew up here. Captain Mannering grew up here. Beryl Reid grew up here.
Everyone.
Well, kind of an interesting cast of characters.
For sure. Well, thank you, Paul, for bringing your own interesting cast of characters to everything you've written, and also for inviting us into your wonderful shop. I hope that everyone takes the hint and comes and visits.
Oh, and watches my YouTube channel as well.
And that as well.
If you do a search for my name, you'll find it, and you must hit like and subscribe and leave all the comments and send money.
Hit like, subscribe, send money. That's Paul Magrs, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for speaking to us.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Edit it down to like 10 minutes long.
Yeah.
Shh! Whatever you do, tell everybody about it. And mind the steps.